If you ever feel unsafe in a crowd, grab someone's hand and pretend you belong with them. That was the advice my roommate once gave me after a late-night subway scare in Brooklyn. I didn't know that one desperate decision would change my life forever. The crowd at Grand Central Terminal moved like a restless ocean. Thousands of people flowing past each other under the massive painted ceiling, footsteps echoing against marble floors, voices blending into a constant roar that made it impossible to focus on any single sound. I kept walking faster, clutching the strap of my canvas tote bag, trying not to look over my shoulder, even though every instinct told me someone was still behind me. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine was nothing more than too much coffee and not enough sleep after a 10-hour shift at the cafe. But the sensation refused to leave. Footsteps matched my pace somewhere behind me. Not close enough to touch, just close enough to make my pulse pound harder with every step. I turned slightly, pretending to check the arrival board above the main hall, and caught a glimpse of a tall figure weaving through the crowd in my direction. Maybe he was just another commuter. Maybe not. Panic makes your mind race through every terrible possibility, and suddenly the terminal felt too big, too loud, too impossible to escape. That was when I remembered the advice. Blend in. Look like you belong to someone. I spotted a man standing near one of the stone pillars, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked completely still while the entire station rushed around him, like the eye of a storm. I didn't think. I just moved. My hand shot out and wrapped around his, warm and solid, my fingers tightening around his palm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Please, I whispered under my breath, my voice barely louder than the rumble of rolling suitcases. Pretend you know me. For half a second I expected him to pull away. Most people would. But he didn't. His hand stayed exactly where it was, strong and steady, like my sudden grip didn't surprise him at all. Slowly I looked up at him, ready to apologize, ready to explain that. This was just a stupid mistake from a stranger who panicked in a crowded train station. The man looking down at me had dark hair brushed neatly back, sharp features that belonged on the cover of a magazine, and eyes so calm they made the noise of the terminal fade into the background. He studied me like someone reading the first page of a very interesting story. Around us, something subtle shifted. People who had been rushing past suddenly gave us a little more space. Two men in tailored suits appeared near the edge of the crowd, watching quietly like they were waiting for a signal. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying a confidence that made my heartbeat stumble. "Do you always grab strangers like this?" he asked calmly. "Or am I just having a very unusual afternoon?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because in that moment I realized something important. The man whose hand I had just grabbed to feel safe wasn't just any stranger in the crowd. And, judging by the way everyone around him moved a little more carefully, he might have been the most dangerous person in the entire building. And he still hadn't let go of my hand. My fingers tightened instinctively around his hand, but my mind was racing so fast it felt like my thoughts were tripping over each other. I had grabbed a stranger because I needed a shield for 10 seconds. That was all. Just long enough for whoever was behind me to believe I was not alone. But the stranger I had chosen was not reacting the way a normal person would. Most people would laugh awkwardly, pull their hand away, maybe ask if I was okay. This man did none of those things. His hand remained wrapped around mine, steady and warm, like my sudden grip had been expected. I could feel the difference in him even before I fully understood it. There was a stillness in the way he stood, a quiet confidence that made the chaos of Grand Central feel strangely distant. I forced myself to breathe and glanced over my shoulder again. The tall figure I had noticed earlier had slowed near the newsstand about 20 feet away, pretending to scroll through his phone, but clearly watching us. My stomach twisted. I turned back to the man whose hand I had stolen and whispered again, my voice barely audible above the echo of announcements rolling through the terminal. "I am sorry. I just needed someone to stand with for a moment. I promise I will let go soon." His eyes studied my face carefully, not suspicious, not annoyed, simply observant. Then he looked past me toward the crowd. Something changed in his expression. so subtle most people would not notice it. But I did. His attention sharpened like a spotlight, focusing on a stage. The two men in suits who had appeared near the edge of the crowd were now closer, positioned just far enough away that they looked like ordinary commuters waiting for a train. The man beside me spoke again, calm and thoughtful. "Someone is following you." It was not a question. My heart skipped. I nodded slightly without looking back. "I think so. He was behind me when I left Lexington Avenue. I hoped he would disappear once I reached the station." The stranger considered this quietly. Then he shifted his stance a little closer to me, our shoulders almost touching, his posture relaxed but unmistakably protective. From a distance, we must have looked like a couple waiting for a train. The man near the newsstand glanced up again. The moment his eyes landed on the stranger beside me, his entire posture changed. He straightened slightly, hesitated, and then after a few seconds he turned and walked away into the moving sea of people. I watched him disappear between a group of tourists and a rolling luggage cart. Just like that, he was gone. The stranger followed my gaze and then returned his attention to me. "You see," he said quietly, "sometimes crowds are not the safest place to hide. Sometimes they reveal exactly who you are standing next to." I swallowed, finally pulling my eyes away from the place where the man had vanished. "Thank you," I said quickly. "Really, I think that worked." I started to release his hand, expecting the moment to end, but his fingers tightened slightly before I could pull away. Not painfully, just enough to stop me. His gaze remained steady, curious rather than threatening. "You asked me to pretend I know you," he said. "I did. Now I need to know something in return." My throat felt dry. "What is that?" His voice remained calm, but the quiet authority inside it made my pulse rise again. "Why was someone following you through one of the busiest train stations in New York City?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth was I did not know. All I knew was that 10 minutes ago, I had been just another exhausted barista trying to get home after work. And now I was standing in the middle of Grand Central, holding hands with a man who seemed to make an entire crowd move around him like he owned the building. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to process the question while the noise of Grand Central swirled around us like nothing unusual was happening. People hurried past with coffee cups and rolling suitcases. The giant departure board clicked above the main hall, and somewhere nearby, a child laughed loudly. The world continued exactly the same, but my life had quietly shifted onto a different track. I shook my head slowly. "I do not know," I admitted. "I noticed him outside the coffee shop where I work. He followed me 2 blocks. I thought maybe it was nothing at first, but when I turned onto Lexington Avenue, he was still there. So I came into the station because it is crowded. I thought crowds were safer." The man beside me listened carefully, his eyes never leaving my face. There was something unsettling about the way he paid attention, as if every small detail mattered. "You work nearby?" he asked calmly. "Yes, a small cafe on 42nd Street. I finished my shift about 20 minutes ago." His gaze flickered briefly toward the marble staircase leading down to the subway platforms and then returned to me. "You walk home alone every night?" It was not a question again. I nodded slowly. "Most nights. My apartment is in Queens. The train ride is about 20 minutes. He considered this information in silence. Around us, the 2 suited men had shifted positions again. One stood near a ticket kiosk, pretending to read something on his phone. The other leaned casually against a column near the information booth. They looked like ordinary commuters, but something about their posture felt deliberate, like they were watching everything without appearing to watch at all. I lowered my voice. "Are those men with you?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Yes." The simple answer made my stomach tighten. I suddenly felt very aware that I still had not let go of his hand. Or maybe he had not let go of mine. Either way, our fingers were still intertwined, as if we had known each other for years instead of minutes. I tried again to pull my hand away gently. This time he allowed it, though his eyes remained thoughtful. "Thank you for helping me," I said quickly. "I really appreciate it. I should probably go before my train leaves." I adjusted the strap of my bag and stepped back half a step. For a second, I thought the moment was over, that I would disappear into the crowd and this strange encounter would become nothing more than a story I told my roommate later that night. But the man did not move. Instead, he spoke quietly to one of the suited men without looking away from me. "Find out who he is." The man nodded once and disappeared into the flow of travelers moving toward the exit. I blinked. "Who?" "The man who was following you." His tone remained calm, almost casual, but there was something firm beneath the words that made my pulse jump again. "That is not necessary," I said quickly. "He is already gone." "Yes," the stranger replied softly. "But men do not follow women through Manhattan train stations for no reason." I opened my mouth to argue, but then stopped. Because he was right. I did not know why someone had been watching me, and suddenly that fact felt much heavier than it had a few minutes ago. The man studied me for another moment before speaking again. "You never answer my first question." I frowned slightly. "Which question?" His eyes held mine steadily. "Do you always grab strangers in crowded train stations?" Heat rushed to my face. "No." I hesitated, then added honestly, "Today was the first time." For the first time since I had met him, the man actually smiled. It was brief, controlled, but unmistakable. "Then you chose a very unusual stranger." I hesitated after his words, unsure whether to laugh or apologize again. The noise of Grand Central seemed louder now, the echo of footsteps and rolling suitcases blending into a restless rhythm that made it difficult to think clearly. I shifted my weight and glanced toward the large departure board above the hall. The next train to Queens was scheduled in 12 minutes. Normally, that would have been plenty of time, but tonight nothing felt normal anymore. The stranger watched me quietly, as if he could read every calculation running through my mind. "I should go," I said carefully. "My train leaves soon." He did not move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the crowd behind me again. "The man who had been following you might be gone," he said calmly, "but that does not mean the situation is finished." The way he said it made a cold ripple move through my stomach. I wrapped my arms lightly around my bag strap and tried to sound confident. "I am sure it was just someone heading in the same direction. That happens in New York all the time. People walk the same blocks." He did not argue. He simply looked at me with the quiet patience of someone who had already seen this kind of situation before. Then he spoke in a tone that was calm but firm. "What is your name?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "Emily," I answered automatically. "Emily Carter." For a moment he said nothing, repeating my name silently, as if committing it to memory. "Emily Carter," he said finally, his voice smooth and measured. That is a very calm answer for someone who ran into a train station and grabbed the hand of a stranger. I felt heat rise to my cheeks again. When he put it that way, it sounded ridiculous. "I was tired after work," I said defensively. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I overreacted. The stranger did not look convinced. One of the suited men who had been standing near the column walked past us at that moment, speaking quietly into a small device near his collar. He did not stop, but his eyes flicked toward the stranger for a brief second before he continued across the hall. Something about the silent communication between them made me uneasy. I realized again that I had no idea who this man actually was. Yet the people around him behaved as if his presence carried weight. I cleared my throat slightly. "You still have not told me your name." For the first time since I met him, he seemed to consider the question carefully, as if deciding how. Much information to share. Finally, he reached into the inside pocket of his dark coat and pulled out a slim leather card holder. From it, he removed a small card and handed it to me. The paper felt heavy between my fingers, thicker than normal business cards. I glanced down and read the name printed across the center in clean black lettering. Adrian Romano. The name meant nothing to me at first. It was simply a name. But when I looked up again, something in the atmosphere around us had shifted slightly. The suited man near the information booth had turned his attention fully toward us now. Two other men in dark coats stood quietly near the staircase, watching the hall with calm, alert expressions. Adrian noticed my expression and spoke quietly. "Now we are no longer strangers." I swallowed and handed the card back to him. "Thank you for helping me, Mr. Romano. I really do appreciate it, but I promise you I will be fine. I will take my train and go home." For a second, neither of us spoke. The loudspeaker above us announced another arriving train, the echo rolling through the vast hall like distant thunder. Adrian studied me for a moment longer, then looked toward the entrance of the terminal, where travelers continued pouring in from the street outside. When he turned back to me, his voice was calm, but the certainty inside it made my pulse quicken again. "Emily," he said slowly, "the man who followed you saw you standing here with me." I nodded uncertainly. "Yes." And then he disappeared. Adrian slipped the card back into his coat pocket. "Exactly." He paused for a moment before finishing the thought. Men who disappear that quickly usually do not stop watching. They simply change where they are watching from. I stood there for a moment after his words, trying to convince myself that he was simply being overly cautious. Grand Central Terminal was one of the busiest places in the entire country. Thousands of people moved through it every hour. The idea that someone could still be watching me from somewhere inside that ocean of strangers felt unrealistic. And yet the calm certainty in Adrian Romano's voice made the possibility difficult to ignore. I shifted my bag higher on my shoulder and forced a small smile. "I appreciate the concern," I said, "but I really do not think anyone is still following me. If someone was, they would have stayed closer instead of leaving the station." Adrian did not respond right away. His eyes moved slowly across the vast hall, scanning faces, entrances, staircases, balconies. The way he looked at the room was not casual curiosity. It felt deliberate, precise, almost strategic. After a few seconds, he returned his attention to me. "People who want to be seen stay close," he said calmly. "People who do not want to be noticed step back and wait." The loudspeaker above us announced another departure. A wave of travelers surged toward the tracks, suitcases rattling across the marble floor. For a brief moment, the crowd thickened around us, bodies brushing past on every side. Adrian did not move. His posture remained relaxed, but the space around him somehow stayed clear, like the current of the crowd adjusted automatically. I noticed it again. People avoided bumping into him without even realizing they were doing it. That quiet authority unsettled me more than I expected. I took a slow breath. "Look, Mr. Romano," I said carefully, "tonight has already been strange enough. I grabbed your hand because I panicked. You helped me, and the man who was behind me left. I am grateful for that, but I do not want to cause you any more trouble." His eyebrow lifted slightly. Trouble. The word seemed to amuse him. Helping someone stand safely in a train station is not trouble, Emily. His voice softened slightly when he said my name, but the intensity in his eyes remained. "What concerns me is that you still do not know why someone was watching you." I hesitated. That was the part one could not explain. I worked long shifts making coffee for commuters. I lived in a small apartment with my roommate in Queens. My life was simple and predictable. Nothing about it should attract attention from strangers. I shook my head slowly. I honestly cannot think of any reason someone would follow me. Adrian studied my expression for a long moment, as if measuring the truth behind my answer. Finally, he nodded once. "I believe you." That simple sentence surprised me. "You do?" "Yes. Because if you knew why someone was following you, you would not have walked into a crowded station and grabbed the hand of a stranger." The honesty of that observation made me laugh softly despite my nerves. I guess that is fair. The large clock above the main hall read 7:28. My train would start boarding soon. I glanced toward the staircase leading down to the platforms. I really should go now. Adrian followed my gaze. "The train to Queens leaves in about 8 minutes, he said quietly. I blinked. "How did you know that?" His expression remained calm. One of the advantages of paying attention to details. Before I could respond, the suited man who had disappeared earlier stepped back into view near the entrance of the station. He walked quickly but without urgency, stopping beside Adrian and speaking quietly. I could not hear the words, but I saw Adrian's expression change slightly as he listened. When the man finished, Adrian gave a small nod and the man stepped away again. I looked between them nervously. What was that about? Adrian turned his attention back to me, his voice still calm but carrying a new weight. "The man who followed you did not leave the station. He is outside the main entrance." My stomach tightened instantly. "Outside?" "Yes." Adrian glanced toward the tall windows that faced the street beyond the terminal. "He is waiting across the street, watching the doors." I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. "That means if I walk out there alone..." Adrian finished the thought quietly. He will know exactly which train you take home tonight. The words settled in the air between us heavier than the noise of the station. For a moment, I simply stared at Adrian, trying to decide whether I should believe him or convince myself he was exaggerating. Outside the main entrance, waiting, watching, the idea made the back of my neck prickle. I had lived in New York long enough to know that people watched each other all the time. But this felt different, deliberate, patient. I folded my arms instinctively, suddenly aware that the enormous hall of Grand Central no longer felt as safe as it had a few minutes earlier. If he's outside, I said slowly, then I can just leave through another exit. There are several entrances to the station. I could take the subway from the lower level instead of the street. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression calm and thoughtful. When I finished, he gave a small nod as if acknowledging the logic. That is a reasonable idea, he said. But the man outside did not arrive alone. My stomach tightened again. What do you mean? Adrian glanced briefly toward the wide windows facing the street, then back to me. There is a vehicle parked across the avenue. The same man has returned to it twice while watching the entrance. That usually means someone else is inside. The way he described the situation made it sound less like a guess and more like a quiet report. I shifted uneasily. How can you see that from inside the station? Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured slightly toward the balcony level above the hall, where travelers often stood to watch the crowd below. One of my associates has a better view from there, he said calmly. I followed his gesture instinctively, scanning the railing above. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a man standing near the edge of the balcony, holding a phone to his ear while looking down toward the entrance doors. The moment my eyes reached him, he turned slightly away as if continuing his conversation. I looked back at Adrian, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. So you have people watching the building. His expression did not change. I prefer to stay informed about my surroundings. That simple statement made me realize again how little I understood about the man standing in front of me. His clothes were elegant but understated, his voice calm, his posture relaxed. Yet somehow the entire situation around him seemed carefully organized without appearing obvious. I suddenly remembered the small card he had shown me earlier. Adrian Romano. The name still did not mean much to me, but the way others responded to him clearly did. I swallowed and glanced again toward the staircase leading down to the train platforms. My train will leave soon. Adrian followed my gaze and nodded slightly. Yes, in about 4 minutes now. I hesitated before asking the question that had been forming in my mind. What would you do if you were me? For the first time since we met, Adrian paused longer before answering. His eyes studied my face with quiet focus, as if weighing something carefully. Then he spoke in a calm, steady voice. If I were you, I would not leave the station alone tonight. The honesty of the answer made my pulse quicken. Then how am I supposed to get home? Adrian did not look toward the exits or the train platforms. Instead, he looked directly at me. You already solved that problem once this evening, Emily. I frowned slightly, confused. What do you mean? His gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then returned to my eyes. Earlier you grabbed the hand of a stranger because you needed someone to stand beside you. He paused for a moment before finishing the thought quietly. That strategy worked the first time. I suspect it will work even better the second time. I stared at him for a moment, trying to understand what he meant. The echo of footsteps and distant train announcements rolled across the vast marble hall, but suddenly the noise felt far away. Adrian Romano watched me with the calm patience of someone who already knew the answer to a question I had not finished asking. My eyes dropped to my hands, remembering the moment earlier when I had grabbed his without thinking. That impulsive decision had worked once, but the idea of repeating it felt strangely different now. You mean I should pretend again? I asked slowly. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Not pretend. The words sounded deliberate when he said it. Stand beside someone who makes it very clear you are not alone. I glanced toward the tall windows that faced the street outside. Through the glass, I could see the glow of evening traffic lights and taxis moving through the avenue. Somewhere beyond those doors, the man Adrian mentioned was still waiting, watching. The thought made my chest tighten. I looked back at Adrian uncertainly. You were suggesting that I leave the station with you. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the large clock above the hall. 7:32. Your train to Queens has already started boarding, he said calmly. If you go down to the platform now, the man outside will still see you exit the building later. My stomach sank slightly. That meant the train was no longer the safe option I thought it was. The realization made the station suddenly feel smaller, the exits more exposed. I took a slow breath. So what happens if I walk out with you instead? Adrian's expression remained composed, but there was a quiet confidence in his voice when he replied. Then the man outside will assume you are not someone he can approach. I studied his face carefully. The way he said it was not arrogant. It was simply certain. But that certainty raised another question in my mind. Why would he assume that? Adrian did not hesitate this time, because he will recognize me. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. I blinked. Recognize you. Adrian slipped one hand casually into the pocket of his coat, while his other hand gestured briefly toward the entrance of the terminal. The kind of people who watch strangers in the street tend to know which situations to avoid. If he sees you leaving with me, he will not try to follow you tonight. The way he said tonight carried an implication that made me uneasy. What about tomorrow? Adrian met my eyes calmly. Tomorrow we will know more about why he was watching you in the first place. That answer raised even more questions than it solved, but I realized something else at the same moment. I trusted him more than I expected. Maybe it was the way he had quietly protected me earlier without making a scene. Maybe it was the steady confidence in his voice. Or maybe it was simply the fact that the situation outside the station felt more dangerous than standing here with him. I looked down at the polished marble floor for a moment, thinking. Then I exhaled slowly. All right, I said. If walking out with you solves the problem tonight, then I will do that. Adrian studied me for a second, as if confirming I understood what I was agreeing to. Then he nodded once. Good. He turned slightly toward the entrance doors and lifted his hand in a small gesture. Across the hall, one of the suited men near the staircase straightened and began walking toward the exit ahead of us. Another man on the balcony above moved toward the stairs leading down. Their movements were subtle but coordinated, like pieces shifting quietly across a chessboard. I watched the scene unfold with growing realization. You planned this very quickly. Adrian's gaze returned to me. Situations like this rarely allow much time for planning. I swallowed and adjusted the strap of my bag again. Then I guess we should go before I change my mind. For the first time since we met, Adrian offered a faint smile. That would be wise. He extended his hand toward me again, calm and steady just like earlier. Emily, he said quietly, if we're going to convince someone outside that you're not alone tonight, then we should make it look believable. My eyes dropped to his hand. The same hand I had grabbed earlier in pure panic. This time I reached for it on purpose. My fingers closed around Adrian's hand again, but this time there was no panic driving the motion. The warmth of his grip felt steady and deliberate, his palm firm without being forceful, like he was offering stability rather than control. Around us, the constant movement of Grand Central continued without pause. Travelers hurried past with coffee cups, backpacks, rolling suitcases, conversations echoing beneath the enormous painted ceiling. Yet the moment our hands joined, I noticed the same strange shift that had happened earlier. People naturally stepped around us. The invisible current of the crowd seemed to flow differently. Adrian did not hurry. His pace was calm, measured, guiding us toward the tall glass doors that opened to the street outside. I forced myself to match his rhythm, even though my heart was beating faster now. The bright lights of the city glowed through the windows ahead. Yellow taxis slid through the intersection. Red brake lights blinked in long rows along the avenue. Somewhere out there, the man who had followed me was still watching. Adrian spoke quietly without turning his head. When we reached the doors, do not look around too quickly. Just keep walking with me. I nodded slightly, even though he probably did not need confirmation. The closer we moved toward the entrance, the more aware I became of everything around us. The polished marble floor reflected the overhead lights. The large brass clock above the center of the hall ticked forward steadily. The soft echo of footsteps followed us like distant rain. Adrian's associates moved subtly through the space as well. One of the suited men stepped ahead and pushed open one of the glass doors before we reached it. Another crossed the lobby behind us, blending easily into the flow of commuters. None of them spoke. None of them made it obvious they were working together. But their quiet coordination made it clear that Adrian was not simply another businessman leaving the station. We stepped through the doorway, and the evening air wrapped around us instantly. The noise of the city replaced the echo of the station hall. Car horns sounded in the distance. A bus rolled past slowly. The sidewalks outside Grand Central were crowded with people heading in every direction. Adrian did not slow down. He guided us toward the corner of the block where a sleek black car waited near the curb. I kept my eyes forward like he suggested, but I could feel the presence of the street around us more intensely now. Every passerby felt like a possible observer. Every parked vehicle felt like it might hide someone watching. As we reached the curb, Adrian opened the passenger door of the car beside us. The interior lights came on softly, illuminating dark leather seats inside. He turned slightly toward me. "You should sit here for a moment." I hesitated before moving. "What about the man across the street?" Adrian's gaze shifted briefly past me toward the opposite side of the avenue. For less than a second, his eyes focused on something behind the moving traffic. Then he looked back at me calmly. "He sees us." My stomach tightened again. "And?" Adrian's voice remained calm and certain. "And now he also sees who you are leaving with." I followed his gaze carefully this time, glancing across the street without turning my head too obviously. A dark sedan sat parked near the corner, its headlights off. Through the windshield, I could see the faint outline of someone sitting behind the wheel. The figure remained still, watching the entrance of the station. "Watching us." Adrian spoke again, quietly beside me. "Notice what happens next." For several seconds, nothing changed. Traffic continued flowing through the intersection. Pedestrians crossed the street with the light. Then the dark sedan across the avenue started its engine. The headlights flickered on briefly before the car, pulled smoothly away from the curb, and disappeared into the moving traffic. I blinked, surprised. That was it. Adrian nodded once. Yes, that was it. The tension that had been building in my chest slowly loosened. So he really did not want to be seen near you. Adrian rested one arm lightly against the top of the open car door. People who watch quietly often prefer to remain unseen themselves. I looked down at our hands, still joined together between us. When I glanced back up at Adrian, he was already watching me with the same calm expression as before. "Emily," he said softly, "tonight you chose the right stranger after all." I remained standing beside the open car door for a moment after the dark sedan disappeared into traffic, trying to process how quickly the tension of the last 20 minutes had dissolved. The city around us continued moving like nothing unusual had happened. Yellow taxis slid through the intersection, their headlights reflecting against the glass walls of the terminal behind us. A group of tourists laughed loudly as they passed on the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a street musician played a saxophone, the distant melody drifting through the evening air. But my heart was still catching up with everything that had just happened. I looked down again and noticed that Adrian was still holding my hand. Not tightly, not like someone trying to keep control, just calmly, like the connection between us had never been interrupted since the moment I grabbed him inside the station. Slowly, I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like an hour. "So he's really gone," I said quietly. Adrian glanced down the avenue where the sedan had disappeared, then back at me. "For tonight, yes." His voice carried the same calm certainty it had from the beginning. I nodded slowly, trying to let that reassurance settle in. The sudden quiet inside my mind felt strange after the rush of fear earlier. I realized that if Adrian had not been standing exactly where he was inside that station, the evening might have ended very differently. The thought made me look at him again with new curiosity. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "Not just for walking me out here, for the whole situation." Most people would not have stayed involved that long. Adrian studied my expression for a moment before answering. "You asked for help. I happened to be standing there." His response sounded simple, but the quiet confidence behind it made it feel like more than coincidence. The driver of the black car stepped out and opened the rear door for us without saying a word. I hesitated before moving. Adrian noticed immediately. "Emily," he said gently, "you still need to get home tonight, right?" The reminder made me laugh softly at myself. Somewhere during this strange evening, I had completely forgotten about the original goal of getting back to Queens. I glanced toward the subway entrance again. I could probably still catch the next train if I hurry. Adrian shook his head slightly. "The train schedule will not solve the question of why someone was watching you earlier." The quiet seriousness in his tone brought the concern back instantly. "That is true." I rested one hand against the edge of the car door, thinking, "So what happens now?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Tonight you go home safely. Tomorrow we find out who that man was and why he followed you through Manhattan." The certainty in his voice surprised me again. "You say that like it is already decided." Adrian met my eyes steadily. "Some questions deserve answers." The driver waited patiently beside the open door while the traffic lights changed again above the intersection. I finally nodded and stepped into the car, settling into the smooth leather seat. Adrian walked around the other side and joined me a moment later. The door closed softly and the noise of the city faded behind the tinted windows. For the first time all evening, the world felt quiet. I looked over at him as the car began moving through traffic. Adrian Romano sat beside me as calmly as if this had been a completely ordinary night. But nothing about this evening felt ordinary anymore. I leaned back against the seat and shook my head slightly, still amazed at how quickly everything had changed. Earlier tonight, I had grabbed the hand of a stranger because I was afraid. Now that same stranger was the reason I finally felt safe. Adrian noticed the thoughtful look on my face and spoke quietly. "Something on your mind?" I smiled faintly and glanced at our hands resting on the seat between us. "Just one thing." Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "What is that?" I looked back at him. "Earlier you said that people who watch quietly prefer to remain unseen." "That is true." "Then why do I get the feeling that the man outside the station was much more worried about being seen by you than by anyone else?" Adrian was silent for a moment, the faint glow of city lights reflecting in his eyes as the car moved through the traffic of Manhattan. Then he answered in a calm voice that carried the same quiet authority I had felt since the moment I first grabbed his hand. "Emily, there are many people in this city who know my name." I held his gaze, curiosity rising again. And Adrian's expression softened just slightly. "And most of them prefer not to be noticed by me."